welcome to Thoughts on Thursday. It's Reverend Miller.
And Stuart Holmes.
We're glad that you can join us as we reflect on worship and prepare for this coming Sunday's worship service that you can experience either in person or online through YouTube or Facebook. And right, Stuart, we're in this kind of series where we're looking at how the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has changed worship and what changes may stay as we move away from the pandemic. At this time, it feels like we may never move away from the pandemic. But that's the question, is what changes that we might see stick? And the interesting thing is as we look at what happened with the pandemic, that our worship service went on to become a virtual worship service since we couldn't meet. And so you had this idea of both a visual and an audio service being broadcast out very simply and easily to our whole congregation and anyone else in the United States. And as Stuart and I were talking, if the pandemic would have happened earlier in church life in maybe the 60s, it wouldn't be online. There was no such thing for the common person. Would we have been on radio? Or remember in the day when we had shut-ins and we would make a tape recording and put it in an envelope and send it out? Would a pandemic in the 60s cause us to send tape recordings to everyone in church and we would have done just an audio version of it?
That was called a cassette tape.
A cassette
They probably don't know what a cassette tape is.
They might not. And or an 8-track. You know,
8-track.
I don't know if a lot of worship services were on 8-tracks, but so because of our technology, we have had the ability to go right to a virtual service. And it started out with 3 people, Stuart, myself, and we would have a soloist. And we were using just my phone, and we turned the organ area, the pulpit area into a studio, and we moved our candles to the frame where we would have to be on the video. And so it was an audio and a visual experience. And so the question we might have now is, if we move away from the pandemic, will we continue to broadcast our service online, YouTube and Facebook? And if we do that, will it be an in-person service, just taped, or will it be a combination service, thinking of people who are online and also in person? For instance, Stuart and I, last week, we went to Emmanuel Baptist Church in town and looked at what they were doing. And one thing you could do is on Facebook Live, which we're eventually going to get to that, you have people reacting on Facebook Live. So the minister could actually answer a question someone asked thousands of miles away on Facebook Live. And it wouldn't just be an in-person service, it would be interacting. So those are the questions we're asking for the future, but it also, as we are doing both right now, we have to balance out and think about what we're doing, both audio and visual. And that has an impact on the choices we make, and that's also impact on the length of our service, which I'm going to talk more about the length next week. So those are the things we're wrestling with, and it also, as we have gone to both the in-person and virtual service, we have lengthened the service and we've added some singing and we've added some other elements.
Right.
And we've tried some things, and Stuart's going to talk a little bit about that.
Right.
You ready?
Ready?
Yeah, I'll chime back in.
That was my cue.
Yes.
We mentioned how we've adopted our space to reflect the changing of the time with the pandemic. We've mentioned before on previous Thursday Thoughts that the screen is gone. We organists have struggled with trying to cope with being kind of hidden in a corner and never being able to, we have not enabled the audience to watch the conductor. If we were just a choral director, the choral director would be right in front. If we were playing the saxophone, right in front. Piano, right in front. But that organist has been pushed back. Now, with the advent of electricity and digital computers inside this console, we can actually move things around a lot more and be visible. I was telling Rob, we organists, tend to shoot ourselves in the foot. Why would we be hidden during a recital? And the same question could be asked, why are we hidden during a service? Are we any more distracting than an instrumentalist would be or a pianist would be playing during the service? And of course, that brings up a whole bunch of different questions for not just our congregation, but the congregations as a whole. I was watching a tape from Lincoln, Nebraska, First Pilgrim Congregational Church. A friend of mine is the organist there. Huge program. They probably have 50 in their choir and everything. And the pulpit is there, the organist is there, the lectern is there. It's all out in the open for everybody to see everything that goes on to creating worship. As we struggle with these issues of pandemic, we also struggle with, okay, how are we going to move forward? What part are we going to go back to the old way, and what part are we going to adopt for the new way of thinking? A new way of thinking, not the new way, a new way. And only a moment to talk about When in Our Music God is Glorified, one of my favorite hymns. We said that about the hymn last week, as I recall.
Yeah, you must like hymns. I would say that's
what
a
is
horrible thing for the music director to say, but, you know.
That's one of the
I like the Bible too, so we're good.
We're hitting it out of the park. When in Our Music is a wonderful hymn especially for those who appreciate church music. And I'm going to be playing a wonderful variation on that. A little bit on the unusual side, but it's a wonderful postlude this week.
And that's what we're looking at. When in our music, when in our worship is God glorified. We're trying not to be celebrities, but we're trying to glorify God and engage both those people present physically and those who are coming through the camera for a virtual service. And it's interesting, the gospel lesson is blind Bartimaeus and his healing of sight. So as we talk about visual and audio and having a full worship experience and service, that's really what we're looking at and wrestling with. And it's interesting as we kind of reflect on how technology has transformed worship. At one point in time, preaching, a good preacher, a great preacher, was a great orator with a voice and deep, and it was metered. And that was the gold standard, and you would probably say the biggest medium at that time was radio. Now we see a much more casual preaching, a conversational preaching. And some of the biggest preachers of our time are that kind of casual, more like, oh, they're just having a conversation with you. And so that does change, and it's interesting as I was reflecting on this. We're here doing a video. We're not sending an email with our thoughts, right?
No.
And I don't know if Stuart or myself would call ourselves influencers, but that's the new name, right, for YouTubers, and it's just interesting how your camera phone, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook has transformed that, and we're trying to use that to reach people, to communicate God's grace and love, and we have to experiment with that. And sometimes most of the time we're gonna make all the right choices, but sometimes we might try something that doesn't work and then we have to change that. And that's what we're looking at, and we look forward to seeing what kind of energy we might put into the technology side, even when the pandemic is over. So that was a lot of thoughts.
A lot of thoughts. The challenge is, do we stay the way we were, or do we move to new places as we consider what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
So,
And we hope
it's an open book.
within our music, God is glorified.
Oh.
Within our service, God is glorified.
And I'll just play the ending on that.
All right.
And we'll call
There we
it
go.
a day. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you hopefully on Sunday, in person or virtual, and then next Thursday.